Okay, so what we're going to do now, and this is kind of, if you get, this is one of the things that you get out of this class, which is actually going to be practically useful, is this idea of how to analyze market size for a product. So there's a little bit of math here. Now I realize you didn't become marketing majors to be mathematicians, but if you're a marketer and you're looking at things like moving into new markets, it's nice to be able to do a few back of the envelope calculations just to have a feel about the market size. Most sophisticated modeling would be done with computers, but I've seen computer models where they've been based on faulty assumptions, so you get garbage in and you get garbage out. So just having a little bit of knowledge yourself, I think, is actually a pretty good thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through these different methods of analyzing market size. I'm going to give an example for each of these, and I'll also, based on my example, there'll be some questions on the homework for these, which will enable you to kind of get on top of this before the exam. Okay, so the first is this method of analogies. So imagine I'm trying to move Buffalo Wild Wings into Poland. Yeah? And I want to know what my market potential is in Poland. I know, for example, that in the US, there's like 10 McDonald's restaurants for every Buffalo Wild Wings. And I think it's going to be similar in Poland. So I think we're going to have this ratio of Buffalo Wild Wings to McDonald's in Poland is going to be similar to the US. Now, we kind of know what McDonald's is in Poland, and we kind of know what BW3 is and McDonald's is in the USA, and what we want to find out is the potential for BW3 in Poland. So we just literally multiply both sides of this equation by McDonald's in Poland, and we use this to kind of work out a similar, the market potential for BW3 in Poland. Okay, so let's have a quick numerical example on this. And this is in a slightly different field. So imagine, for example, that we are releasing the place. This probably wouldn't happen in reality these days, but just kind of go with the example that we're releasing the PlayStation 5 in Japan, in Thailand, a year after we release it in Japan. And what we think is that we have the PlayStation 5 and actually let's just call it the PS5 to annoy the writing. PS5 in Thailand divided by the PS4 in Thailand is going to be equal to the PS5 in Japan all over the PS4 in Japan. And basically we have this information. So we have PS5 in Japan is 2 million. PS4 in Japan is 1,600,000. And PS4 in Thailand is 200,000. So the PS5 in Thailand equals, just multiply both sides by the PS4 in Thailand, times, just this, all we're doing is we're multiplying what we'd previously done for the PS4 by the ratio of PS5 to PS4. I'm sorry, my S looks too much like a 5 in Japan. Sorry. Yeah. And so the PS4 in Thailand was 200,000. Another way of thinking is saying that the PS5 in Japan has done 20 kind of percent higher than the PS4 in Japan. It's going to be similar ratio for Thailand. And that's going to be move it up a little bit. And that we get 250,000. So we kind of had the 200,000 sales for PS2 in Thailand. Then we multiply it by this ratio because we think the ratio is going to be similar in Thailand and Japan. And we get this figure of 250,000. Okay, so next method of market size. And this is the McDonald's analogy. And the McDonald's analogy is we're trying to find the, and this is called because we have, it was kind of, I guess, founded by McDonald's, but we're trying to find the potential for McDonald's in a different country. And we know how many people there are for McDonald's per McDonald's in the US. So there's maybe one person, there's 20,000 people for every McDonald's restaurant in the US. And we think it's going to be similar in this country, but this country is relatively poorer. So we multiply it by the ratio of GDPs. So if my country is as quarter rich as the US, then this ratio is literally going to be a quarter. You know, the number is going to be a quarter of what it would have been in the US. So let's kind of let's do another example, and we'll actually just do it on this slide. So let's imagine that we're going to Brazil, and Brazil has a population of 200 million. And it's going to have a GDP per capita of 12,500. And we're also getting, the US has got a kind of GDP per capita. Now notice these aren't the exact figures. I've just done it to I've kind of made them so that the calculation's kind of easy and we don't have to use a calculator. And that we have at McDonald's in the US, McDonald's every 20,000 people. So the potential is for kind of McDonald's in Brazil is the population of Brazil all over the number of people per McDonald's times this ratio of per capita incomes. So this is like going to be 1/4. And we get a potential market size of 2,500 restaurants. So the thing to do, and so when I've touted this before, what people always get confused, is say I was doing this for Buffalo Wild Wings, this would be the number of people per Buffalo Wild Wings in the US. People are, you know, I've just said this in the past, people are still trying to plug the number of people per McDonald's in. This really is, it's only called the McDonald's analogy because the example it was used on originally was McDonald's. So if we're having Buffalo Wild Wings into Brazil, we would actually have the number of people for each Buffalo Wild Wings. Okay, so let's kind of go to the third one. And I guess I just need to Okay, the longitudinal method of analogy is probably the most complex of these, and the idea um, is you have two markets, and one market is more advanced than the second market, and the idea is that you know a certain ratio in your market. So I've thought of a software example where the ratio between internet goods and non-internet goods in my market is the same as another market in 2010. So I would utilize this in order to kind of work out the market potential for my internet solutions in my own country in 2020. So the idea is a little bit like the analogy method, but it's thinking that my country is maybe 10 years behind another country. Okay, so let's do an example. So for example, let's just think we have I don't know if you guys have heard of CRM software, customer relationship management software. But this is kind of software where salespeople, store all their contact. So it's things like you manage contacts, training, sales, etc., 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 finances. So there's two different types of solution. There's an internet where everything is done online. And everything's stored in a cloud. And we also have a non-kind of internet, what we call a client server, where we have just a big central database, and each local office has their own database which they merge. So this is client server. And we've got two Eastern European countries. And I say, for example, that Romania in 2020 is similar to Slovenia in 2010. And we have released our solution in Slovenia in 2010. So we're going to say Romania internet in 2020 all over Romania client server in 2020 is going to be equal to Slovenia internet in 2010 all over Slovenia client server in 2010, 2100, going into the future. And we actually have this information here. So we say that this is $500,000, and this is $1 million. And my client server at the moment is 5 million. So we'll say the Romania Internet 2020. So we basically multiply both sides by 5 million. Okay. And it's going to be 5 million times by 500,000 all over 1 million. and it's going to be 2.5 million. So that's going to be my predicted size of the market. Okay, so the next little thing we're going to do is we're going to have what we call a trade audit. So a trade audit, this is just literally, we're trying to determine the market size, and we use it from freely available information. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically the market size in the country is how much they produce minus what they export plus what they import. So this is pretty useful if you've got a mature industry. We kind of know what the market size isn't going to change much, but not good for fast-growing markets. And if we're in a country that doesn't have a great rule of law, where there's a large black market, for example, there's high taxes on cigarettes, and very few cigarettes go through the legal channels. Most have gone through the black market. Just so you've got the definition, a grey market is, say, for example, I have Levi jeans, and they're the real Levi jeans, but in Mexico, they're half the price as they are in America. So I import the Mexican Levi's into America and sell them cheaply. That's the example of a grey market. Again, when people go to different countries to buy cheap pharmaceuticals and they're the real pharmaceuticals, that's the grey market. So let's just have an example of a trade audit. Okay, let's go back to my whiteboard. Okay, so imagine we're looking at bicycles in the Czech Republic. Okay, I've just realized I can't spell Czech. Apologies to anybody with ancestry in Czechoslovakia for that. And so the bicycles in Czech Republic, say for example in the year 2019. So we have the year, and we have the local production. We have the imports. And we have the exports. And so what we're going to do is we're going to work out the market size. And so that's going to be the local production plus imports. So this is actually by far the easiest one, minus the exports, which is going to be 410,000. Okay, so we go to the final one, and that's going to be the chain ratio method. And the chain ratio method is basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to start off with our population, and then we're trying to hone it down. So imagine that I'm trying to sell Nicorette gum in Japan. And I know that I think people who might actually, our market for this is people within the ages 15 to 64. And so that's 67.5% of the population. However, of this 67.5% of the population, only 31% of these people smoke. So that we first get the adults, taking 15 as an adult, and then we get the adults, the proportion of these people who smoke. So literally, we take the population, we work out the number of adults, and then we work out the number of smokers. So I won't even do this separately because this equation is just so easy. So you get that we have 127 million people. We multiply it by 0.675, 67.5, yeah, 67.5%. We're left with 85 million people. Now, so this is the number of adults in the Japanese population. 31% of these smoke, so multiplied by 0.31, and we get just over 26%, 26 million people, smoking adults, and that's my potential market in Japan. Okay. Okay, so just a little note, we're actually going to skip, and I'm not going to include it in the exam or anything, the cross-sectional regression analysis, just simply because this relies on material that you would have done in Business Stats 2 and Marketing Research, which are not prerequisites for this class. So you could ignore anything that says cross-sectional regression analysis. So, market size assessment, why do we use it? Well, a lot of this stuff is done by computer modeling these days. But it's always nice to have a few really simple rule of thumb assessments just to make sure that, you're not being fed rubbish by the computer. And, you can look at things where by sensitivity analysis, it means just like, what if Brazil's GDP increased by 20%? What would be the number of restaurants then? So you could play around with potential numbers a little bit. You could say, what happens if we're minus 10% and plus 10%? Then we could get some sort of an interval rather than just saying we're going to have 333 restaurants. Okay, so that's just an example of McDonald's analogy. Okay, so I'll skip through this, but I'll do a few quick examples of where I've already talked about how point of sale store data are used. That quite often this data they'll be used by supermarkets to help determine promotions, but they can also be packaged and then sold back to and aggregated and sold back to consumer product companies, for example, to see, how is my brand of coffee competing against another brand of coffee. I've also talked about large-scale consumer panels from companies like Nielsen, where we have maybe 10,000 global people ready to fill in consumer questionnaires. By single source data, this is just combining different sources of data. So we might combine somebody's TV viewer habits with what they shop online. And again, there'll be a panel with somebody from Nielsen. And literally, they will have something on their media, which will record what they watch. But they will also maybe have a mini scanner of their own where they scan everything they buy. And that's recorded as well. I'm going to talk about Master Micro in a minute. But this sort of scanner data, it's used by the manufacturers, and it's also used by retailers. But as this is my little area, I want to kind of give you a few more examples of how it's used. So the first I'm going to give you is, I might ask you a little question on the homework of this, but it's not going to be on the exam because it's not in the textbook. First is market basket analysis. And here what we do is we kind of trawl through all the consumer transactions and we look for items that kind of go together. So a certain brand of toothpaste might occur more often than we'd expect by random than a certain brand of toothbrush. So we could actually do a promotion, on these items, like buy one, get 50% off. An interesting one, this was found by data miners, diapers and beer. Now the rationale behind this is that guys get sent to the grocery store later at night to buy emergency diapers, and while they're there, they kind of reward themselves with beer. So this is a strange finding, which is often quoted in data mining talks. The next one is what I call collaborative filtering. And again, the idea is, say we have 3 people. And we have what we call the chick flick Sleepless in Seattle. maybe Anne would rate it like a 9 out of 10. And James and Cruz would be 4, 5. And then we'd have like Saw. There's lots of Saw movies, which maybe Anne's like a 7, a 6, and James is a 9, and Cruz is like a 6. And, you know, we'd want to recommend, you know, and then we'll have something like, we'd have Avatar. You know, what do we do with Saw 2? And what we want to do is basically, we look based on kind of, we look for movies with similar rating patterns. So maybe, for example, Anne has given this a 6, and Cruz has also given maybe a 5 or a 6, and we want to know how James would like Saw 2. So we see that Saw 1 and Saw 2 have very similar ratings patterns, and we can kind of fill in the blank for James here. Now, technically, we use correlations, and again, I can't see that you guys have all taken business stats, but the idea really is we're just recommending movies. So if we have somebody who's liked a certain movie, we will recommend them similar movies. This is collaborative filtering. And the final one is segmentation. And this is, you know, we have a promotion that we send to the entire population. Then we get to segmentation. So we maybe have a segment of this high income, single, fashion conscious urban females. And, you know, we're going to send, maybe we're a clothing retailer, we'll send a promotion specifically designed for this segment of maybe certain certain discounts and certain high-end brands that this segment are likely to appreciate. And the idea with the internet is these segments are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We're getting down to, you know, we might have high-income, single fashion conscious, democratic, voting, vegetarian females. With information we can get on the internet, this segmentation is becoming more and more sophisticated. These are just 3 little techniques. Because the book talks a lot about generalities, I thought I should give you some kind of additional techniques in this. So if you look at Walmart, they're incredibly sophisticated with this sort of stuff. They have teams of PhD data scientists working for them. Probably the same with Amazon. But this, obviously, in more developing nations, the full potential of some of this technology has not yet been fully exploited. Now, computers have actually been utilized in interviewing as well. And again, this is kind of a little bit out of date, where we basically have interviewing aided by a computer. So based on responses, the computer might, recommend questions or give more details and kind of, tailor the experience. And in a way, just thinking about this in modern terms, if I'm an interviewer, I'm going to have an iPad to support me, and the iPad will suggest questions, and if the interviewee responds a certain way, we'll adapt the questionnaire accordingly. Okay, so this is like the most common sense thing ever, how to select a marketing research agency. If I'm say moving into the Japanese market, quite a culturally specific market, so I decide I need a marketing research agency, a local marketing research agency. I want them to have a high level of expertise, maybe particularly working with foreign clients. So I want to look, do they have any specific qualifications? What's their track record? Can you give me client references? The fact they will work with me, they don't just have a fixed methodology and they do this regardless, have good communication skills, and how do they structure their costs? Is it a one-off fee? Do they kind of charge per customer they contact? So again, I would say there's a lot of like common sense information there. And I've just given some examples. I'm not gonna. I'll let you kind of. I'll let you kind of look at these if you want to. I think this video is long enough. But I give you some example. This is IRI. This is the company I said which kind of combine all this scanner data. dunnhumby, they were a UK company, and they developed a lot of analytics for targeting customers and managing customer loyalty in the UK. But they've now done a lot of work for Kroger in the US. Something called Brain Juicer, which is a more kind of qualitative marketing research. And these are people I actually worked with in Milwaukee, and these guys are like really qualitative marketing research. So there's kind of a whole range of kind of marketing research companies there. Okay, and finally, we have the emic versus the etic approach. And this is just something it may be actually on the exam in the multiple choice. Sorry, I just flipped through. I didn't mean to do that. So say, for example, I'm developing, I'm Mississippi State, and I'm moving into a new market of education. The etic approach will say, you know, there's a universal need for education. Students need certain skills globally, such as Microsoft Excel. They need some analytics training. They need good communication training. If I was following the emic school, I'd focus on the particularities of the culture. So this culture is quite a collectivist culture. People don't want to stand out from the crowd, so we might have to change the way we do class participation and class discussion. So that's an example of how we would adapt in the ethics school. Okay, and that's all, folks. Feel free to email with any questions.